Welcome back to the channel. Today's lesson is called Catapult Power. So before we talk about catapult power, let's talk about what a catapult is. In the slide in the background, you can see the image of this type of catapult. And basically, in this type, a gigantic weight drops, and that creates a rotational action that flings the projectile up and over at great speed and distance. And this is the type of power that the goats tap into, and you should start tapping into it as well. So in this lesson, we'll be looking at how Novak Djokovic and Roger Federer use the catapulting process to generate power on their forehand. We'll also look at new ways to look inside the body more and to see how this catapulting process works and how it generates so much incredible power and speed. Let's get started. So the easiest reference I have for those to understand the power of catapults maybe is the opening battle scene in the movie Gladiator. This was about the Roman general Maximus, played by Russell Crowe. And in the opening sequence, the Romans used catapults to attack the Gauls who think that they're safe in the forest line. And they find out that they're not once the catapults are launched. And that is the first big mistake the Gauls make, that along with not protecting their flanks from Maximus's cavalry, ends up defeating the Gauls. So militaries have used catapults for over 2,000 years. And the reason being is that they can throw as much of a 300-pound rock 400 feet, smashing down, castle walls or siege protection. And, this was just a standard instrument of military power. The last great battle that catapults were used was by Cortez when he laid siege to the Aztec capital, which is now Mexico City, in 1521. The siege lasted 93 days. The Aztec fortress was on this island, and the Spanish used catapults, as well as a few cannons they had, to break down the siege works of the Aztecs, eventually defeating them and establishing the New Spain colony that Spain formula they used to rule all the Americas. So catapults have played an important part of history, as you can see. But even today, catapult power plays an important part in sports, especially in the swinging and throwing sports. In the background here, you can see an animation of how a machine catapult works. This one is called a trebuchet, which means that there's this big bucket that falls that provides the energy and power to fling the arm and then the string and the projectile in a rotational action. In the background here, I've labeled the different parts of the basic catapult. So we have the bucket, which is the weight falling. We have the fulcrum, the arm, and the sling, and the cradle that holds the projectile. Those are the basic parts, along with the A-frame of the catapult. In this slide, I'm just focusing your attention on the release segments of the catapult, the arm, the sling, and the cradle, because we all have something of the equivalent when we look at the human being. And first of all, if you look at a standing human and you draw lines between the top of their head down to their base of their feet, if their feet are apart, they have sort of an A-frame structure, very similar to the structure of the catapult. Of course, a human being is not a machine like a catapult. So when we talk about a bucket dropping, we're talking about the center mass of the human body, especially the pelvis and the glutes or buttocks. So we've talked about this sinking process, dropping the weight into the ground and the pressure into the ground so that energy can rebound up through our body. That's one dimension of catapult power. And we've talked about the other dimension, which is the twisting, torsion energy, where I showed you the twisted rubber device. So this was the demonstration, is when our body and muscles and tendons and fascia get twisted as we turn and coil. There's a tremendous amount of energy stored in this bending process and the torsion, twisting of our muscles, and it has a spring-like effect when it's released. And of course, the human body is not a wooden frame like a machine catapult. In terms of energy production, it's built around the kinetic chain, which is 32 different segments of the body, starting from the feet all the way up our body. And so as we load the catapult by dropping, twisting, and lowering, we're getting both the bucket falling and the twisting and coiling power stored in loading the catapult. That energy then is transmitted up the kinetic chain all the way, winding through our body up into our shoulder complex, which, as we've talked about in Born to Swing, Born to Throw Man, has evolved over 2 million years to develop, the most efficient and powerful throwing system. And a lot of that has to do with the shoulder complex, where we can store all this energy and transmit it down. The joint inside of our shoulder is the fastest joint in a human body, capable over 1,200 revolutions per minute. Incredible speed inside. And that accounts for part of the way we can accelerate and transmit speed that rises through our body out into our arm and or this whip portion that we're always talking about. And the human body is different than the machine catapult. The human catapult different than the machine catapult in terms of the last release segments, where there's these fixed sort of rigid pieces except for the string and the catapult. We have 5 release segments. We have the upper arm, the forearm, the elbow, the wrist, and the fingers. The fingers being like the cradle that holds the projectile. And all of these segments accelerate in sequence in the whip element of the swinging process. So we have a super accelerator at the end of our catapult that the machine doesn't. Now I want to walk through how Djokovic implements this catapult process in detail, critical image by critical image. So in the first slide that you're seeing, he is just starting his loading turn back, and you can see that he hasn't yet planted his full pressure into his trail side. So he's just starting to plant weight there. It's not weighted yet. Then in the next slide, we do see Djokovic, how he's planted that trail foot and got weight into his trail hip, and his right hip is twisting in the socket, creating stored energy and stability in this trail hip. Now I've also put a dot around his right glute or buttocks to identify exactly what's happening in terms of the loading of the pelvis. So I'll do it from down the line view here. So as I load into this trail hip and start to turn back, this right buttocks, you see the right dot, is going to go back towards the target. There's the target. So my right glute is rotating back and down towards the target in a fully loaded situation. We don't always have time to do this full load, but we're always looking to do this. So we're want to keep focused on trying to load as much as possible. So this isn't just putting weight into the trail leg and foot and putting pressure and torsion, twisting into the hip. but it's also turning the pelvis this way. So we're not leaning back, we're coiling around the center turn, remember? And so as Djokovic starts to complete this, as you'll see, this right glute is going to continue to rotate backwards towards the target that way. So now as Djokovic moves through the phases of the swing, where he's got the take back and then he's going to drop to the slot, we just see the sinking of the body. We see the side bending starting here. And we're going to see that, as we talked about, as we start this process, this side bending, it helps our lead side make contact with the ground. And we start the transfer of energy at that point when our toe touches. We're not there yet, but we're starting the process. So the side bend like this shifts the pelvis so that the lead foot touches the ground. And that's a critical part of this recentering process that we'll talk about in a second. And again, the glutes, the pelvis, the strongest part of our body, is twisting and coiling in this centered way, creating a tremendous amount of stored energy, as well as the sinking is the twisting component of it. Now moving further along in the swinging process, where Djokovic has taken the racket somewhat down and then he's about to spiral down and into the slot, you can see that his lead foot is bearing some weight, and he's already begun the process of transferring to a 50-50 weight balance between his trail foot and his lead foot in this sinking process. And that recenters the torso over the center of the pelvis. Recall from an earlier lesson what I called the butt back exercise. This is just coming at it from a different point of view, but we're still in our athletic posture, right? And we're still turning and keeping our athletic posture as we come down into the slot. And so this recentering is a critical phase that most recreational players, and as we see some professional players, skip through or skip over. We saw it once again in the US Open last week at Coco Gauff with all the forehand topspin errors that she made. And again, what is the error is that she gets into somewhat of a loaded position, and then instead of sinking and recentering and rotating through the shot, she stands up her body and straightens up. And once you've straightened up like this, you can't rotate any further with your body. And then your arm takes over in this flat outside in swing plane, which brings the tip of the racket forward too soon, closes the face of the racket down. You have a swipe across. You know, it's a pretty fatal error, as it's proving out to be. And it is a technique issue. It's not a mental fitness issue. It's just getting the right technique of staying down and recentering and staying down and rotating all the way through the shot. Otherwise, you get into your wound up position and then you try to fire your hips or you fire your shoulders from there. You're going to be coming over the top. Your lower body is not going to be unwinding, and your top of your body is going to unwind too much. We've gone over this several times, but it's a critical thing to think about, is that we have to have this lowering and recentering before we proceed in sequence to releasing the racket. The other thing that we've talked about in the butt back posture is that we need the butt back in order to create room for our elbow and arm to swing through on an inside out path. If you are standing straight, your arm can't swing in that manner. It'll go straight through or around the ball like this. So creating the space in here to do it with our side bend and our coil and our tilt. And we're going to be swinging on this spiral line that we've talked about so much, inside out. Using the power of the body in this spiraling action. This is what Coco is missing. As we move along even further down into the movement into the slot, with the side bend and the pelvic shift to the front. Now, as we get further into this drop down phase, transition phase between the take back and the forward swing, now our left side, can be anchored. There's pressure into this left side, and it can be used as a brace and an anchor to help us pull around our pelvis in this centered turn way, instead of extending forward. This is another issue, of course, is the untutored player will think that everything happens on this hitting side, and therefore to get power out there they need to extend their right side and hitting side through the ball like this. And this is going to disrupt everything. It's going to disrupt the rotation of the body, disrupt the contact point. It's never a good thing. So once we've come out of the slot in a recentered way, we have weight transferring into our lead side, we have pulling from our non-hitting side that's going to help power the upper part, but the unwinding sequence always begins with the lower body. The lower body always moves first, so even as you're coming down, your lower side is starting to open up, going this direction. And with the anchoring in our lead leg early, players can still do a little bit of a pullback back here on their torso, so they're creating a bigger stretch. As their lower body unwinds, they're still pulling back and stretching back like this. Once again, loading the catapult even further. Now, as the lower body leads the unwinding of the body, unwinding of the hips first, followed by the unwinding of the upper body, as we talked about, this left leg can act as a brake, an anchor to the hips just completely turning around here. We'd lose all of the energy and power if we just rotated around, turned around. So this left leg, lead leg, breaks and stops the rotation of the pelvis. And as that's stopping, then that helps propel the upper unwinding to go much faster. And so we talked about also on the hitting side, where everything is external rotation back here to the slot, then everything moves into internal rotation to unwind into the hitting and forward swing. And to make things just a little bit more complicated, we talked about how in the process of coming through on the swing, the left side foot and leg are going into internal rotation, just like our non-hitting arm goes into internal rotation to stop our left side from rotating around. If we had external rotation, there'd be nothing really to stop my shoulder from rotating all the way through. We want to break that. So there's this internal rotation of the non-hitting arm, and there's an internal rotation of the hip. And this can happen on the ground or in a scissoring action that we see when the players leap up. But there's another important component of this movement mat that we haven't talked about, and virtually I've never seen it talked about in other tennis instruction. So in addition to this internal rotation of the lead leg and foot, breaking and stopping the continuing rotation of the hips, there's also an important power generation component of that move, which is that this lead leg will straighten and push the energy that we've injected in the ground back up through the body, as you can see in this little diagram. And this straightening and pushing back of the lead side is a critical part of the catapult process that we need to understand and focus on in practice. And again, this is a universal part of the throwing and swinging process. And we see it, and I'll provide a nice short video clip for you in the notes to look at this. If you look at ScottieScheffler, who's the #1 professional golfer for the last 2 years, won the Olympic Games. And we see, the wind up at the top, and then we see the sinking and the recentering, the hips leading the way. So there's this lowering and transfer to the lead side. And then as Scheffler will go through, his lead side will straighten and pull up, creating a lot of energy to be transferred into the club. And you'll actually see him sort of jump up in the air a little bit, and you'll see the rotation, internal rotation of his leg. And there's this splitting action in the pelvis. In baseball, the same process takes place, and I'll have a nice clip of Aaron Judge, who's the leading home run hitter in the major leagues the last 2 or 3 years. And he starts way up here, and then he sinks and he coils around, he shifts into his front side. With baseball, they have this big step, but it's the same concept. They'll step as they swing, and the weight transfers into this lead side, and then as they swing through, this leg is straightened and all the energy is pushed back into the swing to snap it through. So we have to learn how to practice this maneuver as well in tennis. Going back to the Djokovic catapult process, so the energy that comes up through the non-hitting leg as it's straightened and pushed back into the body first goes through our pelvis to help snap that open with more power. But that energy is then transferred up into our upper torso and into our shoulder to do what? Help with the sling process that we've talked so much about. And the incredible power that we can get from this catapult-like energy if we create the right forms and have the right sequencing to release it. So going back up to the big picture of the swing, I want to play this little video of Djokovic's forehand, where we just focus on how the hips start to lead and initiate the rotation and unwinding first, followed by the torso. And I have the tracing technology on the hips and then on the torso, so that you can see how the hips always lead with the torso following. So let me play that for you. Finally, I want to play the video of Djokovic with the racket tracing technology in it that focuses on the last element of the swinging, the slinging action. But the overview is again looking not so much at the hand and the rackets as the dynamics of the body winding, sinking body process that's leading and driving the release of this energy in the sling. So keep your eyes on all the individual moves that we talked about through this Djokovic sequence, but then see how it culminates in this free release of the racket. Now I want to cover how Federer does this a little. We've covered all the details and the process, and his catapult process is pretty much the same in Federer. So we don't need to go through each of those slides again, but I want you to see this first video, which is just an overview of the phases and sequences here. And we'll end with the tracing technology on the racket. But again, I want you to focus on all the body motions that we've talked about, the sink into the slot, the transfer of the hip bump into the lead side, the landing of the lead leg, the recentering of the body as we move into the forward release of the swing. How it all flows and seems so effortless. This is the catapult power being harnessed in this smooth, rhythmic, sequential manner that we want. Finally, I want to take one more look at the Djokovic forehand from a different perspective. And so what I did was create a skeletal frame-by-frame creation where I've traced the major segments of the body, and then I've gone through and blacked out the actual bodies just so we see the frame of the skeleton as it goes through this process. So let me just play the sequence through for you once or twice, then we'll talk about it. So in this skeletal view, I want to focus on this transition part of the swing, which is the one that we're trying to illuminate the most today. So you see that from the top of the handbrake, and he's starting to lower his arms a little bit. Djokovic is starting to get recentered and starting to sink in the drop. But you can see that his weight is pretty 50-50 on both legs, as he moves into this process. So as he gets further into the sequence, you'll see the energy start to transfer into that lead leg, and you'll see this lead leg bending forward, especially at the lower parts, as it starts to receive the weight and the energy transfer. And then in the last part of the sequence, as he's coming through more, we're seeing the straightening of the leg and the pushing back of energy that helps turn the pelvis and the body and powers the catapulting action of the swing. So one last look at the complete sequence, Djokovic and Djokovic's skeleton, before we move into our deliberate practice segment of the video. We're now in the deliberate practice section of the video, and I'll once again remind you of our admonition that you should take injury prevention seriously, and that you shouldn't do any of these exercises if you're injured or hurt. And stop the exercise immediately if you're experiencing any pain or discomfort. Do all the exercises in athletic posture and do them correctly. And finally, start all exercises slowly, work your way into it, make sure that you can come back the next day and feel okay and you're not really sore or hurting in any way. So today's lesson is all about catapult power, and we've seen that just like the machine catapult, the human catapult has a way of loading and unloading that we need to focus on. So we're going to take the focus off the arms and the racket, focus on our body, particularly our pelvic and our glutes, our butt. These are the biggest and strongest muscle areas of our body. So we're talking about like the bucket weight of the catapult dropping to load the slinging action. We need to drop and sink our center mass as we move into the slot position. But not only that, we're not just getting the falling mass of the bucket, but we're getting the turning and torsion in our hips and in our center of our body, as we talked about in rotating the pelvis back around, back this way when we have time to get into a fully loaded position. So in this first sequence of practice, I want you to work on the first part of this loading action. So we're going to begin with the ready posture, and you'll have to remind yourself every time you go out to practice, athletic posture, always beginning through end. So 30% sort of forward tilt of the spine, neutral back and even spine, so no hunched and no arching, but feeling like it's much lower than you normally would have it, and that you're sinking some pressure and weight into your legs and your pelvis area. So now we're ready for some real action. So we'll go through the details we went through last time. I basically want you to, turn out and spiral up to handbrake above your head. You can pick whatever goat you want to imitate in doing this. This is not the focus here, but we're focused on the first phase of the drop of the racket before we swivel the racket back into the slot. So we're just going through this part of the phase. And so I want you to focus that in your step out, you were creating some light pressure into your trail foot and leg. We're not heavy loading at this point. Remember, we're just still up here and we're just turning and winding a little bit, getting prepared, and our hands are starting to break and fall. But there is some weight shifting into our trail side, and you want you to focus on that. This is something that we should try to do almost every shot, even returns. Can't always do it, but there should be some pressure and weight transfer into this trail hip and glute. So that's the first exercise, is basically from a ready position, the spiral up, and then the beginning process of hands falling before the swivel with some pressure into the trail side. I'll pause the video for 10 slow motion reps of this. So we'll pick it up from where we left off, which was the handbrake and starting to fall, but before the swivel. So we can start from this position. And we only have a little bit of pressure at this point into our trail leg, but the second phase is, then I want you to do the sinking and the side bending, and with some weight going to the lead side. So we should have told you this, we should be in a open or semi-open stance to feel this a little bit better. So we're going from here, down here, sinking, side bending, full weight into our trail leg, and a little weight into our lead side, but we haven't yet transferred our center mass forward yet. So we're just breaking it into smaller chunks. So here to here, with some little feeling of touching with the lead leg. I'll pause the video for 10 slow motion reps. So picking up the sequence from our drop here, where we're still weighted maybe 70-30 on the trail leg to the lead leg, haven't yet transferred all of our weight to the, or momentum to the forward side. Now we're going to want you to do the full recentering move, so that as we further sink down and center our torso, and we have maybe 60% of our weight going into our front side. Now we're centered over our axis of our turn, and we have the ability to drive out with the trail hip and pull with the lead hip. And I don't want you to do that yet. I just want you to do the recentering and sinking even further. So I'll pause the video for you to do 10 slow motion reps of the full recentering move. So with the full recentering move, this transition move, momentum going into our front side, but not quite there yet, we're ready to really launch the catapult. And remember, we have to have this transitional phase in all swinging and throwing action, where the body recenters and sinks even further, gathers the pressure and energy into the ground, and starting to move up into the body. So on this next sequence, I want you to go through the launch process from we're here and recentered, and now we're starting to come out of the slot, and we're rotating, pulling with our lead side around a rotational action of our hips. We're not extending out, we're not stepping forward towards the target, we're not extending our right side and our hipping side to the target. We're moving in a rotational centered way around our pelvis, and we're feeling that unwind, and as we unwind, our left leg is going to push back and straighten, and that energy is going to come back into our body. So I don't want you to do the swinging part of the launch here. I want you to do the pushing back and straightening of the lead leg as we move through. So we're not focused on slinging yet. So I really want you to focus on this transfer, rotational transfer from the trail to the lead, and the straightening and the pulling back of energy into your pelvis. I'll pause for 10 slow motion reps of this. Then in this last exercise, I want you to do the full launch of this. So we have started the process of straightening and driving back the energy on our lead side, but now we're gonna add the trail side, drive up and through that spiraling action as well. And we're gonna let the lead, the hips lead, the lower body unwinding lead, as our torso, upper body kind of swings back. So we're getting more stretch. And then after the stopping of the lead side rotation, we want to feel the rotation of the torso coming through with the arm lagging, slinging. So we're working on that last part of the turn of the swing into the follow through. So I'll pause for 10 slow motion reps of that. So we've broken up this movement into these chunks, as we usually do in deliberate practice, and you can do this on your own in all strokes, in all your practices, and you can creatively chunk and break it up into different things that you want to do. But after you break it into chunks, then we have to reassemble it into a complete movement. So we will start from the ready position, and I want you to do just 10 slow motion reps of the whole thing, pausing between each rep to see what parts you may have missed or skipped over, and just feeling all the different movements in sequence as best you can. You're gonna not do it perfectly by any means, but let's not worry about it. Let's just keep focused on improving after each rep. So 10 slow motion reps all the way through the catapult loading and unloading swing sequence. Pause the video. Continuing with our deliberate practice theory, that once we do something slowly and feel and learn the movements a little bit more intimately, then of course we have to start worrying about execution and out on the court, and so we have to speed things up. So now I want you to do 10 medium speed complete reps of the loading and unloading. Again, pausing a little between each rep, seeing if you could smooth it out. Make sure that especially you're getting this recentering move in the transfer of momentum and the straightening on the lead side, and that your hips are leading the way first, followed by the upper body. I'll pause the video. Next, of course, we need to do these things at full speed. So I want you to do 10 full speed reps of the entire catapult loading and unloading process. And hopefully you guys have got a camera by now and you're on this face-on perspective. That's how I'd like you to film this, so you can objectively look at after end of the practice, you know, yourself, and see if you have the athletic posture throughout and you stayed down. See that you've done the sinking and recentering and the straightening, and the hips are unwinding before the upper body unwinds. Not worried too much about the slinging in this exercise. So 10 full speed reps. The whole thing should take about a second. And hopefully you're going to film this and look at it later. I'll pause the video. So in this final couple exercises, I want you to be out on the court with your partner or your ball machine. I want them to feed a ball to your forehand side or the ball machine, so that you just have to take a short step out. I don't want you to have to run, because we're working on our swinging movement, not our running movement. And the first would be 10 cross-court forehands at medium speed. And you're trying to feel, again, the things that you felt when you were just going in slow motion without hitting a ball. You want to try to feel all those things in this medium speed version of it. And you don't have to do one after the other. You can ask for a pause in between, think about it, regroup, and do it again. So I'll pause for 10 medium speed reps. And now for the final, we go at full speed. Hopefully you'll get your camera out on court and actually record this as well from the face-on perspective, the way I'm filming this. And we're going to try to leave maybe some of the conscious corrections behind in this full speed version. So we're just going, you know, catapulting. Think about it, I'm going to go catapulting, and you're going to do it as fast as you can and hit it hard as you can, and try to feel the power of this sequence catapulting going off. I'll pause the video for you to do that. So you can see that there's a lot of pieces to this catapulting process that we need to practice in order to implement it. And that catapulting, like slinging and a lot of other things that we've talked about, isn't just something of history in the past. This is what the founders of Nike, Bill Bowerman and Phil Knight, knew when they founded their company, Nike. As you can see in the background, Nike is the Greek and Roman goddess of victory. And the symbol that they chose, the swoosh, represents, you know, triumph, speed, and movement, all the things that Nike represents. So in regards to whether you should go out and now practice all these things that you've seen in the video to implement the catapulting process, I would say that if you want the goddess of victory to visit you more often on the court, and who wouldn't, I'd say one thing in regard to whether you should do these practices or not. Just do it.